Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at Etrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Curt 4-pole trailer wiring harness on a 2018 Ford Transit T350. Transits are used for a bunch of different things, and a lot of times for business, people will be able to pull a trailer. So if you have a hitch on your T350, it's very beneficial to pick up a 4-pole trailer wiring harness, and that way when you plug into your trailer, you'll have those light sequence headed to the lights on the trailer, and that way you stay safe and legal. And this kit will plug in directly to your factory lights. You don't have to cut any major wires as far as the factory ones. Now the trouble I found is the clips aren't exactly great. I had to trim them a little bit to make them work, which is not exactly my favorite. I was kind of hoping they'd snap in a little bit better, but really the rest of the installation just kind of comes down to running wires up to the battery to get that 12-volt power, and then after that it's pretty simple. It goes back together and then you'll be able to have your light sequence go to your trailer. Now, as far as the installation goes, you really don't have to be a wiring guru to get this to work because it does plug into those factory connections. There are going to be a few different spots where you're going to be using butt connectors to make that attachment, but really the hardest part is just running the wire up to your 12-volt power source. And I'm going to walk you through all those steps to make sure you get yours installed. So let's take a look at that. To begin our installation, we're going to go ahead and get our taillights removed on both sides. So open up your doors, and you're going to need a T20 Torx bit. There's just going to be 2 screws, top and bottom here, that we're going to go ahead and remove. And then the taillight just kind of slides out. It does have some alignment pins, and sometimes the hinge can kind of get in the way, so just kind of work this out slowly until we get our taillight out. The alignment tabs are just kind of on the end here. There's just 2 of those, so if you need to pry, you can kind of just wedge over there. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and unplug our taillight. There's just a little safety clip or a lock here. We'll just push this down, get our plug separated here, and we'll go ahead and repeat on the other side. To gain access to our plug, we're going to eventually feed it through the grommet that's on the outside, but we need to pull off this panel. Now, this one may be a little bit different than what you have on your Transit. If you have a plastic scuff panel, it's actually a pretty good spot to be able to run wires over to the other side. Ours has a steel tread plate here, so I'm going to be running mine underneath the vehicle. It's pretty much the same concept. You just might route it slightly different, but we're going to pull this panel off. So I'm going to just kind of pry on the bottom here. It should just be some plastic clips. There we go. So you can see that this part just kind of sits on the bottom. So if you pry maybe on the top here first, that should pop out fairly easily. Now underneath the vehicle, we're going to go ahead and find this kind of rubber panel here. And this is just kind of making sure that water doesn't get in here. But with this out, we're going to be able to see through our pocket where our taillight was, some light, and that's where we're going to be passing things up. Again, if you have that scuff panel, you'll be able to do it inside of the vehicle, but ours is going to be a little bit different here. So what I'm going to do is fish wire a wire down, and that way we can pull the wires up to our plug. Our module is going to live up there as well. So before we do that, I want to attach our power wire, and that way we have enough to make that connection and still run our power wire down. So using an airline tube, I'm just going to take this and feed it down until it feeds through that hole that we just created. Now you might be able to do this once it's pulled up, but I think this is a much easier way. So what we'll do is take our spool of black wire that's included in the kit, grab one of the ends and strip it back. And there's butt connectors included in the kit. I'm going to choose to use a heat shrink butt connector. I like these. Once you heat this down, it kind of becomes a watertight seal. So I think it's just a better option long term. So we'll crimp this down. And then take our heat gun and shrink it down. Now at the end of our airline tube, we're going to go ahead and get our yellow, brown, and white plugs here. This is going to be for our left turn signal. And then we have our white ring terminal, which is going to be our ground. And I'm just going to tape this onto our airline tube. And then we can head back up and pull this through. pull our pull wire off. And then to make our connection to the taillight, we are going to have to cut through this grommet to pass it through. So just a utility knife here. You might want to just cut the grommet, or I'm sorry, pull the grommet out. And we're just going to make a cut here. You can just do an X pattern. And just make sure it's large enough to get your plug through. And at this point we can make our first connection here. So we have this other end, it's going to snap in. It's designed to fit with that factory plug. So get that snapped in place. Now something I noticed when trying to plug this in, it was kind of fighting me, and you can see that the alignment tabs are just slightly off, and it doesn't put it in a great position. I don't want to bend the pins inside, so I'm going to just modify our plug here by just cutting these tabs off. So use a utility knife and just kind of run it along here. And we may have to do this to the taillight as well, as I tried that plug and it was kind of the same situation. We'll get this one plugged in now that it's trimmed. We can pop our grommet back in for now too. Now to make it pretty easy, you can route your ring terminal through this top slot here if it's not being used, and then just with our self-tapper we'll get this drilled in. And then just make sure it's tight enough for your ring terminal to not move around. So now that we have our ground in place, we need to get our module mounted up. And there's two different ways you can do this. There's probably more than a few, but one of them, double-sided tape that's included in the kit. We can stick that to any of these portions here. There's also this tab. You can run a self-tapper through that, or you can just use a zip tie to zip tie it up to either some of the holes that are here or the factory wire loom. Doesn't really matter, as long as it's not rattling around as you're driving. So with that mounted in place, we can go ahead and get this panel put back on. And before we get our taillights put back in, there's black silicone that's included. We're going to kind of just goop that up and make sure that it's a nice watertight seal again. You're going to want to take any of the slack that we have and just kind of lightly pull that down. And we're going to cut our panel just to make sure that it can go back in place. So I'm just going to cut out a notch and then we'll put some silicone on that as well. You can run your 4-pull over to where you want it mounted up. A lot of times, if you don't have a bracket to mount it on, you can use the safety chain, the safety chain loop and the dust cap to kind of hold that in place. You can pick up a bracket. We have those available here at Etrailer. We're actually going to be continuing on later with a ETBC7 kit to run a brake controller. So I'm just going to kind of leave mine loose. But we do need to run our green wire over to the taillight on the passenger side, and then we need to fish wire that up. And same thing, pass it through the grommet and get that all in place. Something that I've ran into is, since we weren't able to pass it on the scuff panel up here because of the tread plate, running it underneath does make it a little bit tight when it comes to wires. Even if I move my module down, I don't think we have enough to pass that through, so I'm going to extend the wires. So again, if you can pass it up through the threshold, that's definitely going to be the best option, but this is the alternative. So we'll just get this all put back together with some heat shrink butt connectors and some extra wire. We have our plugs ran through. I silicone that up. We are going to have to trim the tabs here on our factory plug on the taillight. So again, just kind of run this down. Just kind of take your time here. I've gone ahead and routed my wire up towards the engine bay. So instead of going through where the battery is on the seat, it is going to be a little bit tricky, and honestly you're going to have to pull the seat out to really find a great clean path. So I decided to go into the engine bay. It's going to be a lot easier to do it that way. And I've also ran my duplex because I am doing an ETBC7 alongside with the 4-pull. So if you see the extra wire ran with it, that's the reason why. Now, I just kind of went along and zip tied it as I went down the frame rail, and really just kind of used a lot of the factory wire loom, kind of loops down and creates a nice little spot to zip tie it and keep it out of the way of anything moving. And then just kind of made my way alongside the side of the fuel tank, and you can use those hangers or the straps there to kind of run that through. And then once I made my way to the engine bay, I've run a fish wire up towards the battery, and I'm going to try my best to keep the wires tucked against the firewall by wrapping it behind some of the factory lines. That way it doesn't get into the steering column or the exhaust. And with that routed, I'm going to tape my wires onto the fish wire and just pull that up. So with our power wire pulled up towards our terminal here, we're going to go ahead and connect our fuse holder. And it's pre-stripped on one side, so you can just kind of peel this back. And I'm going to be using a heat shrink butt connector here as well, just because it's in the engine bay and possibly exposed to water. So we'll just strip this back, and then we'll make this connection. And then on the other end of the fuse holder, we'll be putting a ring terminal, and that way we can get this on the battery post. Now make sure you don't have your fuse in the fuse holder. We don't want power going through here. And to get this on our post, we have a 15mm socket, so we'll get this loosened up. Now we'll place our ring terminal on here. And if you want this to cap back down, it's going to be kind of tight here. You might just throw a little, chop a little bit off. That way there's clearance for that wire. And I'll just tighten this down. And now we can take our included fuse and get that placed in the fuse holder. And feel free to tidy up any of your wires in the engine bay or where you may need to zip tie them up so they're not making contact with anything. And then before we hit the road, we need to test to make sure that our wiring is working. Now to test your 4-pole wiring, I have a 4-pole tester. You can pick one of those up here at Etrailer, but the best way I think is if you have your trailer available, plug it in and you're going to run through the light sequence on your vehicle and make sure that all those lights work. Now keep in mind, if you have any faulty wiring on your trailer, it may give you a false negative. So this is a great way to just kind of keep it specific to the vehicle. So I'll hop in and run through the light sequence. Starting with our running lights, next our left turn signal, our right turn signal, and then finally our brakes. So with all of our lights working properly, all that's left to do is hook up to your trailer and hit the road. And that was a look at installation of the Curt 4-pole trailer wiring harness on a 2018 Ford Transit T350.